Welcome everyone to our program called Reduce, Reuse, and Reflect. This event is part of our community conversation series. This year we are talking about the environment. We're talking about trash and recycling. Like today, we're talking about global warming, clothing recycling, our carbon footprint, and much more. And we're in our second month of this initiative. More information can be found on our website at www.goffstownlibrary.com/community conversation. We have great programming coming up, so please take a look. Welcome to Adam Jacobs, our speaker for this evening. Adam is a graduate of the Civil Engineering program at UNH, where he met his lovely wife, Tiffany. They live in Amherst with their 4 children. Adam is a former naval officer and used the GI Bill to obtain graduate degrees in civil engineering and public administration. He is also a reluctantly licensed New Hampshire professional engineer. He began his public works career in the town of Merrimack, and he came to Goffstown as the DPW director in 2015. He left DPW and spent a couple years as town administrator here in Goffstown before coming to his senses and eventually returning to DPW as the director in 2020. So please welcome Adam. And for those of you who may not have heard, I am recording this and any personal information will be edited out. So don't worry about that. We will protect your privacy and our dialogue as we move forward. I would like you, when we get to the question and answers, please don't use chat. Even though I can read them to Adam, this is a dialogue and a conversation, and it's important that we all talk to each other. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm looking forward to talking about some recycling. I'll share my screen here as I warn you. You know, they say that the Scared Straight program didn't work, but I think it did work because there's a whole generation or 2 of us that are probably still convinced that it works. So unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit of Scared Straight tonight in the conversation because that we're starting to get to the 11th hour on the old landfill and recycling clock. So without further ado, I'll kick it off. When it came time to give a name for this talk, I wanted to call it Reduce, Reuse, and Reflect because that recycle piece is what we're reflecting upon, and not really sure. Many communities in New Hampshire aren't sure what the next step's going to be, and that goes for communities around the world, as you'll see. Pretty nice scenery here that we're all accustomed to in New Hampshire. But what you might not know is down in the foreground there is where we send all of our waste to be landfilled from the town of Goffstown. That's North Country Environmental Services, or NCES, landfill in Bethlehem, New Hampshire. It's operated by Casella, which is a Vermont-based company, but they operate one of the 2 biggest and one of the 3 only active landfills in New Hampshire. And our current contract, we're in the middle of a 10-year contract with them for both our municipal solid waste and also our single stream recycling. So hopefully this scene stays somewhat serene, but we're adding to the little bit of a mess here in the foreground by the day. So speaking of landfills, over on the right, we've got a map from Casella that shows all the communities in New Hampshire that are currently contracted to dispose their waste in Bethlehem. So it's a good portion of the state, certainly most of the populous section of the state. There are 6, as I mentioned, active in New Hampshire, but only 3 of them are commercial landfills that accept, they're fully public, so they accept waste from any community, not just from the community where they're based. Those 3, one of them is a smaller community. I think they only serve 6 different towns, and then the other 2 you probably have heard of, ours in Bethlehem that we bring ours to in Casella. And then the second is Turnkey Facility in Rochester, which is operated by Waste Management. There's 2 incinerators in New Hampshire, 1 waste to energy and 1 non-recovery incinerator. They both are not accepting any new waste, because they have enough to keep their incinerators going full time and they can't accept any more. So that option, at least for New Hampshire, is out for us. Right now, the 3 active landfills are limited in capacity. The 2025 is the first, that smaller landfill that serves, I think, the 6 communities. 2026 right now is the projected capacity when that landfill will be full for the Casella Bethlehem facility, and 2034 is the turnkey facility projected fill date. That 2026 number for Casella in Bethlehem is actually extended by 5 years because of a recent expansion I think it was a 7-acre expansion that the state approved after some significant comment, and including from all the communities that bring waste there, but also the local abutting communities. They actually had projected to be full next year if that extension wasn't provided. They are currently requesting a larger expansion to extend that capacity, and they recently failed in an effort to add a landfill in the neighboring town, Campton, I believe it is. So Casella's scrambling to figure out what they're going to do here. There's only a couple years left, and then turnkey, of course, is not too far behind. As far as landfills go, there's been some proposed legislation across the solid waste board lately, last few years, both for the landfill expansions and sightings that I mentioned, but also food waste and composting. Vermont has made a mandatory shift to all food waste is supposed to be diverted. New Hampshire's had a few proposed pieces of legislation to mimic that, or at least get towards that goal. Right now, one of the stumbling blocks for New Hampshire is that without a waiver, facilities can't accept any dairy or meat products for composting. So that limits certainly the number of restaurants that might be able to contribute, but also the municipal composting, or food waste, I should say. There's a stated goal in the New Hampshire DES, Department of Environmental Services Waste Management Bureau. Their goal on the books is that they want to divert the waste stream. 40% of that they would like to avoid landfilling everything that's generated. So that's across the board, from recyclable materials to composting, reducing the generation of. Right now, I think the average in New Hampshire is about 0.8 tons per person per year of generated trash or generated waste. So they want to get that down. And then there's been a little bit of legislation that hasn't gone too far, but it's been proposed anyway to limit single-use plastics, both with the straws in restaurants and also packaging. Sort of the neighboring state status: Vermont has 1 active landfill left. Maine has 1. Massachusetts has 5 active landfills, I believe. The last 2 years, each year, I think 2 have closed, but they have increased the number of waste to energy plants that they operate. So they've sort of shifted there to more of an incineration to energy model. But a fair portion of the waste generated in Massachusetts is actually trucked to Ohio and Pennsylvania, believe it or not. So they're going to keep looking for the most cost-effective thing to do, and right now, unfortunately, that's several states away. Interstate commerce laws do come into play. Right now, it's I believe if you're going to operate a commercial landfill, you're required to allow waste from another state to come across the state line and be disposed of in your commercial landfill. But as everybody knows, of course, not in my backyard, NIMBYism, the overriding usually factor in landfill siting. Nobody wants hundreds of trucks a day going through their community. Smell, perceived odor, air, and water quality detriments the landfill might bring if there are problems with it. And then, add to that the fact that over half the waste in New Hampshire alone is generated outside New Hampshire. So can you imagine your community has been either allowed or forced to have a landfill in your borders or just outside your borders, and now you've got hundreds of trucks, and half of those are rolling from Massachusetts or Vermont or Maine or further away. It kind of wears on people. Bring it local now to Goffstown. Here's for our primary waste streams. Here's what our transfer station puts through, and this is current as of our most recent submission to the state for our 2020 solid waste facility report. So the blue section, hopefully everybody can see the text when we're on screen share, but the blue section, municipal solid waste, We sent just over 6,000 tons of municipal solid waste up to the landfill. So that's one stop. It leaves Goffstown, goes in a truck, gets packed into a truck here on site, and brought to Bethlehem by our drivers and dropped off, and it goes in the ground and gets covered, and that's where it lives. Some estimates have calculated that up to 40% of all municipal solid waste might be compostable, either food scraps or otherwise. Even yard waste makes its way into the landfills, which is pretty sad. So there is an opportunity there to cut down on that number, certainly by quite a bit, but takes a lot of change in habits for sure. Then the next biggest chunk is our single stream program, our recyclables. We just over 2,100 tons were sent out of Goffstown last year, and that's weighed as across the scale. And we take our single stream recycling, gets packed into live floor trailers here on site and by town staff driven to Massachusetts. That goes to a MRF, a materials recycling facility in Charlestown, Mass, where it's processed. So that's about a quarter of our waste stream. That's been pretty steady. It grew pretty significantly once the town started the single stream program and the curbside pickup of that, but it's been pretty steady where it is for quite a while. And we're pretty consistent with industry averages too, except for some of them. Maybe the more progressive areas might have a little bit of a higher, they shoot for a 30 or 33% rate. And then the next biggest chunk of the primary material anyway is construction and demolition, 642 tons last year. And that's all the, timber, drywall, tile, anything that comes out of a housing construction primarily, and shouldn't be added to landfill mass. Some of it gets recycled. But some of it has materials that, pressure treated lumber or asbestos, if somebody's not careful, that we want to make sure that we don't include in the waste stream. And then there's a little sliver there, 39 tons of what's called bypass waste. So that's stuff that can be sent to be processed by somebody else, not landfilled, not recyclable in the common sense, but it might be like electronic waste or some of our tanks, that kind of stuff. So there's other little things that we collect that end up in that last sliver. Overall,
Adam, just can I ask a question about that bypass waste? Does that include like hazardous waste day when you collect all that other stuff?
That number does not. We have on the next slide, I'll kind of get into a few of the other wastes that we do include. It's a pretty small by volume amount. Does take up a lot of time and effort, and environmentally it's a big thing, but it's from a waste perspective. So there is probably some little sliver of less than 1 ton, less than 2 tons total, which makes up a bunch of different items. But hazardous waste not included in that 39 ton. These were just the big 4. So of these primary 4, over 17.5 million pounds, as you can see at the bottom there, and that works out to, if we figure 18,000 people in Goffstown, that's almost half a ton per person in town every single year that goes through the facility. So this one may be tough if the screens are a little crunched, but where does it all go? I won't spend a ton of time here, but municipal solid waste goes to Bethlehem, as I mentioned. That's 100 miles north. The problem with Bethlehem is that it's an uphill most of the way haul, so unfortunately gas mileage isn't great, and it takes a little while to get there, but those are the breaks. That's where we have to go. Right now, residents don't pay any fee for residential municipal solid waste, and if it's a commercial pickup operation, they pay 5 cents a pound, as long as it's collected from within Goffstown. And then when we take it across the scale in Bethlehem, they charge us $59 a ton, and that's contractual. That increases a couple percent a year, but right now it's our current rate is just under $59 a ton. Single stream recycling, as I mentioned, goes to Charlestown, Mass, 59 miles south, and it's downhill a good chunk of the way. No charge to residents, and $46 across the scale right now. This is a variable rate, can change monthly based on whatever the recycling market's doing. It's recently trended down just a bit to that $46. I'll show you a graph in a couple slides that kind of gives you a little bit of the history of the recycling rate. But that's market based. And if we ever get back into a revenue situation again where they're paying us to take this material, we split the revenue with Casella. The commercial and demo and the bulky waste, mattresses, bigger stuff that ends up coming in. DPW brings that to Bradford, New Hampshire, previously to Manchester. Most recently, we changed to Bradford, a different facility, which is 30 miles away, but a little bit better rate than Manchester. We charge residents 7 cents a pound for that, or 14 if they're commercial, and then the cost across the scale for us is $85 a ton. So we try to limit what goes in there if we can help it, because it is a little bit more expensive. Yard waste and brush, resident and vendors can drop it off. We do try to burn it as much as we can. We're trying a little bit more this year. It costs us about $10,000 each time we have a vendor come in to grind the brush pile when it gets big enough. It used to be when the brush pile would be tall enough that our radios and phones would stop working between the scale house and the main building. We knew they were impacting the line of sight system that's set up. So that would be time to grind. But $10,000 a pop a few times a year was starting to add up. So we're trying to burn, but conscious of the environmental impacts of burning as well. So we're looking at a couple options down the road. There's some cleaner burn box vendors that generate these burn curtain equipment that you can bring brush into, and it burns a continuous hot burn with a lot of good ash produced that can be actually sold as a byproduct for farms, and cuts down the amount of smoke. So we're looking into that for going forward. But until that time, that we're going to kind of split between burns when we can and grinding when we can't. Cost right now would just be the labor and equipment, and if we have to grind it, as I mentioned, it's a pretty hefty price. Electronic waste, we have a vendor that comes and picks that up. They do recycle the electronic waste. As you may know, some of the computers have gold in them and some of the chips, so they can usually, we get a small revenue from computers themselves and CPUs, the processing units from those. But things like TVs, we do get charged. So it's because there's so many shapes and sizes, we have flat rates for the residents, and then we get a cents per pound from the vendor when they pick them up. Freon bearing appliances, we try to evacuate all the freon and the refrigerant out of that. We have a special machine and some training by our staff that they get the refrigerant out, and then usually that can just be scrapped in the scrap metal pile. But we do charge $15 for those because of the extra labor that's involved with evacuating them. Hazardous waste, household hazardous waste only, not commercially generated hazardous waste, but anything generated in a household. So paints, oils, gas, chemicals, old chemistry sets, sometimes all sorts of stuff. But if it comes from a house for household use, we can take it. And the goal is to get this out of the waste stream where it can contaminate the groundwater, contaminate a landfill, gets into recycling, gums up the works. We try to get as much of that as we can out. The first 20 gallons or 100 pounds, depending on what kind of material it is free for residents. We do charge right now for non-residents, and we charge for residents after those first amounts. Unlike many locations, we don't do a quarterly pickup or participate in some of the regional quarterly or monthly hazardous waste days. We're actually open, if the transfer station's open, in theory, we can accept household hazardous waste, but we do request it be done by appointment. So usually within a week or two, we can get somebody in and meet with you individually and take your waste and conduct the transaction that way, rather than have a line of cars all with hazardous waste in it. And it kind of turns into quite a scene and a little bit nastier when you have that much material all at once. So then once we've taken the initial steps to make sure that what we have is not leaking or unsafe or is what we think it is, we do some temporary packaging and keep it in the hazardous waste building at the transfer station. And then maybe quarterly, maybe a little more often, we have a vendor that will come in and final pickup and disposition of that. And we have cradle to grave tracking of our hazardous waste. Use motor oil as sort of a carve out from hazardous waste, household hazardous waste. So motor oil, transmission oil, hydraulic oil, that can actually be burned. We have waste oil heaters, special waste oil heaters in the highway garage, and we every time we get a good couple hundred gallons worth down at the transfer station, we'll bring it up and fill our waste oil tank. And most of the year we operate the garage on waste oil rather than heating oil. So it's a nice cost avoidance for the town. And it gets that material out of the waste stream for sure. Bulbs, long mercury-containing bulbs, fluorescents, that kind of stuff. We have a vendor to come pick that up. It's free for residents. We just want to trap that out of the waste stream since it's really hazardous. And then we charge, depending on what it is, mercury or a little more, and then the bulbs are pretty cheap per pound. Tires, we have a vendor that comes, drops a big trailer, and that charge for residents can be anywhere for $2 per tire for a passenger truck, a passenger car, all the way up to $50 each for some of the bigger off-road tires. And that's a fixed rate we pay the vendor just to leave their trailer there, and they come get it when it's full. And then finally, scrap metal, we do haul that to Manchester, and there's a little bit of revenue there, but it's based on the market rate, so that can fluctuate. So kind of a scale of magnitude, our 2021 solid waste division budget is just over $1.25 million. Our revenues we projected were 175,000. So not even close to being, an enterprise where we're getting paid for what comes in and paying the bills. We definitely providing a service for the town and in the case of hazardous waste for people from out of town. But with the hopes that we're providing a good service and get the nice thing that we have in Goffstown, which many don't, is curbside collection, of course. So that's kind of the whole picture. And now we can kind of start to get into the recycling. So single stream in some communities, it's called commingled recycling. As you probably know, and as you get your blue barrel for your curbside stuff, I thought this Camden County's slide kind of shows it just as well as any other. You've probably seen them from us too. The whole idea is anything and everything recyclable goes in the blue barrel. Just don't put plastic bags, don't put dirty stuff in there. And like magic, we're going to come with an automated curbside truck, pick it up, it's going to go away. It's great. We're all recycling. Everybody feels great about themselves. As Michael Scott would say, it's probably a win-win-win situation. Unfortunately, it's kind of fool's gold because there are a few problems built into that assumption about single stream recycling that weren't really taken into account. There's certainly some pros. Ease of adoption, it's that one page flyer. Here's everything that you can recycle. Great. Initially, you do see a big increase in the diversion rate. Studies have shown anywhere between 25 and 50% increases in communities that swap from a source separated recycling, where you have a different bin for each material, to a single stream setup. So you're recycling a lot more as a community. Usually saves landfill space. I say usually, as we'll talk about here coming up about China. Some things are brought to light. Usually means lower budgets, since the assumption is that it's cheaper to recycle than it is to throw things away and to landfill them. And then for us especially, curbside collection is simplified. If we had to separate out 7 different barrels worth of curbside recycling, it'd be pretty tricky. We'd have to have more trucks, more drivers, or make that program go away. And now everybody's coming to the transfer station for all their recycling, or they just throw it all in the trash, which is probably more likely, unfortunately. So to make it work, curbside single stream really is kind of the only show in town. The cons of single stream recycling requires a MRF. That's that material recycling facility that I talked about. Obviously, they're pretty expensive because they have to take all that mixed stream and turn it into separated streams. Highly susceptible to the paper market. A lot of the recycling in a single stream is paper-based material. So as paper goes, the single stream market goes, and we see that swing pretty significantly. It's almost one-to-one direct relationship between paper pricing as a pulp and paper pricing and single stream pricing. Contamination, because it's so easy, sometimes a little too easy. So paper plate covered with food, pizza box, grease, pizza, whatever goes in there. People run out of space in the trash can, and they figure what's a little bit of food or a little bit of plastic bag or whatever going to make a difference in the recycling bin. So a little bit of complacency can lead to that contamination rate. And then in the end, you get a lower quality to your end products. This is going to show us kind of a beginning to end how the material recovery facility or recycling facility works. So we start here in Goffstown. Mixed recycling is picked up by a hauler, in that case us. That's brought to the transfer station, and then from the Goffstown transfer station, we pack it into our tractor trailers. The tractor trailer hauls it to Charlestown, Massachusetts, to the MRF. At the MRF facility, actually needs a human look right out of the gate. So there's people and they sit on an assembly line like Laverne and Shirley with the chocolates going by.
Yeah.
Or was that I Love Lucy with chocolates? Laverne and Shirley with the drinks. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So pick your pleasure. It's the reverse of I Love Lucy. They do not want to be putting anything in their mouth on this line. So all the single stream is coming through on the belts, and their job is to pick as fast as they can anything that looks bad off that line. So a lot of plastic shopping bags, which are not supposed to be in there. Unfortunately, diapers, that kind of stuff. Get in there quite a bit too. So their job is to grab the grossest stuff they can see and work fast. Okay, so what's left now is a relatively cleaner material that's been picked of trash. Now we're moving on, and paper and cardboard get separated. It's lighter. Usually air is used to blow paper out of the stream, but sometimes there can be another third person here, we'll pretend, picking some of the paper products out. So now we've got a more of a container type waste stream that's made its way through. Plastic, glass, and metal continue down the belt. Now you get to the point where you've got a magnetic setup and all the ferrous material. So they're cans, which don't make up as big a portion of the waste stream as they used to, but soup cans, that kind of stuff, anything ferrous will be pulled out by the magnets. Sometimes there's a magnetic belt, so the ferrous material will just stick on the belt. From there, the next thing that they try to get out is get the aluminum cans separate from the steel, because the aluminum's not magnetic in the traditional sense. They use what's called an eddy current, and that's basically just using electricity to generate a little bit of a induced magnetic field. Because the aluminum is very light, but it's a very good conductor, the eddy current kind of makes the aluminum bounce right off the belt. So the aluminum bounces off, the steel is sticking to the belt, or it's already fallen by the magnets. Now what's left is glass and plastic. So now you come through here. You got another density blower, which is pushing the plastic sort of to one portion of, and the glass can either fall out or be left on. And so your final step, your glass is sent out and gets usually pulverized and can get sold as a material to make glass aggregate or recycled glass and new glass bottles, that sort of stuff. And then plastic can fall out. Some of the newer materials recovery facilities have optical sensors, and they can actually tell what type of resin is in each plastic and separate out the different types into different bins. So that's not every single facility, but some of the better ones have that. So kind of almost like a Rube Goldberg setup here, but in the end, you've got fully separated. So you went in with single stream and you came out with basically the equivalent of source separated recyclables. This is a picture of what this is very similar looking to what actually our recycling building looks like on the inside, a little bit smaller and a little less contamination. In Goffstown, we have a pretty low contamination rate. But this is the beginning of a MRF facility where the tractor trailers come in and they dump it in. And it's being ready to be processed into the beginning of that conveyor setup. One of the things they will do at the MRF, they'll kind of give the load a look over when it's dumped onto the floor, just to make sure they don't see any glaringly obvious contamination. Oil slicks. Who knows what else could be in there, animal carcasses or whatever. But they do try to keep an eye on things right as they first hit the floor, just so they don't start gumming up their machinery. Plastic bags, you can see a bunch here on the left side. They tie up all the conveyor gearing and stuff, and they can shut a facility down. So that's why they request that they not be included. But as you can see, there's tons of plastic bags that get recycled, quote unquote recycled, put in the recycling bin. Here's an image of material now coming down that first conveyor where it needs the human look, and they've got you can see these gentlemen in the orange and then at the end yellow vests. It's moving so fast it's blurry on the line there. They've got trash cans around all of them, and their job is just to reach through and grab and throw and hopefully let only the clean recyclable material through. Okay, we've magically waved our fingers and got through all the different conveyor belts, and here's kind of the end result. You see different palletized materials from each of the separated steps. So we got cardboard, paper, looks like mixed plastic, maybe even some clean plastic milk jugs there. Okay, so one of the big things that's happened lately, you probably have heard, it's been global news, and I'm sure it's been mentioned around, certainly around budget meetings and such, but the country of China was the largest global importer of plastics prior to 2018, primarily due to a few things. They have a glut of empty shipping containers that are returning to China every day from obviously all the products that are made in China and shipped all around the world, leading to empty containers going back. So what a perfect way to fill otherwise empty containers than to get a material that you can then turn into more product. So China initially would accept plastics from around the world, in theory, return them to the rest of the world as new product later on. They have their own plastic demand, of course, because they're producing so much material there. And cost of labor is cheap. A lot of people in China, and the cost of real estate was relatively low, is low, a lot of it. So all things that kind of drive their ability to take on waste from the world and turn it into a commodity. So pre-2018, as I mentioned, they were the largest in the world. 56% of the entire global market of waste plastic was going to China, and 70% from the United States. I think it's like 90 or 95% from the European Union. So an incredible amount of material. But most of it was contaminated. It's all contaminated to some degree, but most of it was contaminated to a large degree, to the point where they felt they were spending a lot of their time just landfilling what was coming. So they're paying now to get this material. Single Stream was a revenue producer, so they were actually paying to get these pallets of it. And then they get it to China, open it up, and a lot of it's contaminated. It ends up going into the landfill. And of course, at the same time, China's air, water quality is, terrible. A lot of it due to all this production facilities that they have there, but now they're taking on waste from the rest of the world and, kind of magnifying that effect. So late in 2013, they implemented Operation Green Fence, which put a limit of contamination to 1.5% of what was coming in. We had, at that point in town anyway, $30 per ton for our single stream in a revenue. So the actual market value was about $60 a ton, and we were splitting that 50-50 with our recycling provider. So times are pretty good in Goffstown. The more we can recycle, the better. But China puts this 1.5% limit on contamination, and that has some pretty serious effects, as I'll show you in a second. But 1.5% for Goffstown is pretty close to what we as a town generate right now for contamination. But we're considered one of the better towns that sends our material to Casella. They like our material. It helps even out the higher contamination levels they have from other municipalities, especially the cities, where the high rental population turns into high contamination rate usually, and high turnover. Somebody moves out of an apartment and they just fill whatever barrel they can with whatever material they're not going to be able to take with them. A lot of colleges in the city, so they have a very high contamination rate, 5-6%. Towns like us bring that whole overall average for a facility down. It allows them to more efficiently produce a clean product that they can then sell to a secondary market. So a couple of years go by of this limit being in effect. There's some changes globally to the recycling market as a result, but then January 2018, their national SWORD program is implemented. They announced it in late 2017 without much notice, but starting January 1st, 2018, they limit that contamination level now to 0.5%, which basically is unattainable. So that really disrupted the global market. Now, to take it a step further, as of January 1st of this year, no solid waste imports at all, no matter what's contamination level. The only thing they're accepting is scrap metal. They don't consider that a waste product, and they also don't consider pulp, paper pulp, a waste. But for most producers here stateside, or maybe Europe to a lesser degree, it doesn't make sense to get paper all the way to the pulp phase before you ship it off to somebody else. Once it's pulp, it's valuable here too. So really, China's effectively stopped all imports of any material, unless you're in Asia, as of January 1st. Okay, so here's a little bit of a timeline of a couple years after that that first green fence program was announced. So if you see on the left side here, this is our cost per ton, or if you were below that fourth line up, that's a revenue per ton. So prior to this, even we were down around $30 revenue per ton. So you chug along, fast forward to 2017, things are fairly stable. But then late 2017, they announced that as of January 1st of 2018, this national SWORD program is going to take effect, and contamination levels of 0.5%. Good luck getting it there, but that's all we want. As soon as that happens, you see the huge spike. So now we go from, at that point, it was still a revenue, $5 or $6 per ton. It immediately jumps to $25 a ton and fairly steadily increases for the next year. I tried to highlight over on the left side, you see an arrow there between the $70 and the $60 per ton area. About that point is where we start to break even financially as a town between the cost of landfilling and the cost of recycling. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a 100-mile uphill haul to Bethlehem, and it's a 40-ish mile downhill haul to the recycling facility, which helps. If it was vice versa, then that break-even point would be even lower. But it just costs us so much more to truck up north that it does take a while for recycling to get to the point where it makes more sense financially to landfill. We had that discussion at the select board level a couple years ago, and I know Megan had it again. What would we do if pricing went too much higher? If the fees to recycle actually outweighed landfilling by too much. The board was very supportive. We felt that both environmentally, morally, and then also the just the human effect of trying to tell people that, well, we're not going to recycle this month, but don't forget how, because in 2 months we may swing back and start recycling again. We felt there was too much back and forth, that it still made sense, even if it was a loss financially, to keep recycling and try to weather the storm. And luckily that board was very supportive of that. So we continued with the single stream recycling. And a few months later, we started to see a little bit of a drop. So now we've got a little bit more of a buffer between that break-even point. Few communities in New Hampshire temporarily stopped recycling. A few communities in New Hampshire, I believe, stopped permanently, or at least they haven't gone back to full recycling yet. COVID may have impacted that as well, since some of the plastic waste stream is a little bit less desirable now. But cardboard is at a premium, paper is at a premium. So funky things going on with COVID as well. But just based on China's national SWORD policies here, you see the effect right through at least 2019, right before we got into COVID. The only other thing I'll say about the break-even cost between landfilling and recycling, as I mentioned earlier, the landfill's running out of space. Recyclable materials by volume weigh less than trash. So 1 ton of recyclables takes up more space in a landfill than 1 ton of trash. So they were actually going to charge us a premium to even if we wanted to bring recyclable material there, which in New Hampshire is still allowed. It's not against the law to bring recyclable materials to a landfill. I think it is in Vermont. If we were going to do it, they said, well, it's going to cost you an additional maybe 20 to 30% fluff factor per ton, because it takes up more capacity in the landfill. So we would just be chewing up those remaining years of capacity even faster if more communities start bringing their recyclables there. So not good all around. Okay, so that was a local effects. Here's kind of an image that kind of represents the global effect. So China, 56% of the world's plastics were going to China, and relatively speaking, overnight they stopped. So right now, India and Vietnam were the early movers. They started to take on some of this excess material. A lot of facilities were stockpiling. So the MRF in Charlestown, Mass was out the door with bales of material, processed, waiting, with nowhere to go. places were being rented to store recyclable material. It's, crazy things happen financially when things like this occur. So all sorts of hell was breaking loose. But this picture is from Vietnam, but you can see what happens when you try to take a global market and over half of the global market overnight and move it somewhere else, a place that wasn't ready for it. It's kind of like the version of those guys on the assembly line at the MRF facility now, where they're working an entire stockpile, and this guy's just going through picking out some of the smaller stuff or the trash right by hand. So in Vietnam, not only was the established system and supply chain set up for China, but they had the wherewithal and the ability to handle this material, whereas these other places might have the manpower, but they certainly don't have the infrastructure, or didn't overnight, to get it going. All right, then we'll stay, with plastics. Who even knows what any of these numbers on any plastic material is? I'm in the business and I can't even tell you what a milk jug is unless I look at one of these charts, right? And I just added a couple that were really especially confusing, just to highlight the point that nobody really knows. Everybody in a single stream is going to throw everything plastic in the barrels, and you can't really fault anybody for that. We have our little charts from Casella. We try to share them as we can. Try to help engage people, but in the end, it's a really tough thing to be able to figure out what can be recycled and what's desirable at any given time. I know here in Amherst, we have source separated recycling at our transfer station. We bring our material there, and they've stopped accepting all plastics unless it is a clear beverage container or milk jugs go in their own area. And those are the only two things that get recycled right now in our town. So in Goffstown, we're still taking everything because our Casella, our vendor, and Murph is still taking this. So we haven't really cracked down at all, but it's kind of a crazy thing with all this plastic recycling. But brings us to a good point. Was plastic recycling ever really a thing? NPR did a report a couple years ago. They went back and looked at some internal memos and interviews with big oil and big plastic executives, and they didn't seem to think so in the 70s. They said it wasn't financially viable. Plastics degrade over time, but also as you recycle them, each time you recycle them, they're lower grade end result than they were when they began. So the oil companies and the plastic producers knew this. They weren't really sharing it. They were trying to pump up the environmental aspect. Costly, as we just talked about, with all those different grades of plastic. What are you going to have a different recycling facility for each grade of plastic? Turns out that these grades weren't really tied to recycling. It was more for the people that were manufacturing them. But because of that 3 arrow symbol, people started to associate the symbol with the fact that this is plastic that's being recycled and thought it was a good thing. Really, it was the industry insider sort of information. As they came in, they could look at it and say, oh, this doesn't go into this pile, it goes into that pile. But regardless, the little 3 triangle thing, who cares what number it was? It made everybody feel better about themselves. They were actually pumping a lot of money into advertising at the time about plastic recycling and all the great things that come out of it. The oil companies, of course, are making a whole heck of a lot of their profit from the plastics industry, and the lower oil prices make the plastic even cheaper. So now it's competing with recycled plastic, which is very labor intensive, as we saw. Oil industry doesn't want to get the golden goose killed. They're making $400 billion annually from new plastics, according to a study by Vox. 350 million tons of petrochemicals each year are being used to generate plastic. 350 million tons, so that's an incredible amount of material. BP's internal estimates are that 95% of all growth in their demand for oil over the next 20 years will be due to increased plastic consumption by the world. So obviously, as car manufacturers and people are trying to be cost conscious and get more fuel efficient vehicles, and standards are being tightened, they're going to see all their growth from plastics. So they have no reason whatsoever to want to recycle or if give it lip service, if nothing else. And then there's been some studies recently that only 5% of all plastic that's recycled or thrown in a blue bin, for example, ends up actually replacing virgin material. So 20% of plastic that's thrown in there is trash right out of the gate, so right off the top. So, but then you get down to the waste stream, only 5% of it actually ends up taking the place of new material. The rest is either landfilled or generates these niche products that are sold as recycled plastic. Some industry analysts do expect there at the bottom, as you see, plastic production to triple by 2050. So not good. This is the scared straight portion of this program. There was a pretty neat report done by a group called Systemic with a Q, reported on recently by Vox. But Systemic worked with the Pew Charitable Trust over several years to conduct an enormous study of plastics, their effect on the environment, global economies, et cetera. And they sort of showed how we can bend the curve of plastics use from where it currently is and projected to be. So as you see on the left side of the graph, million metric tons per year of plastics used, and then left side was when they started the study, 2016, and then you can kind of see where little inflection point is at 2020 there. Anyhow, so over on the right side, they kind of break up what can be done to reduce the amount of plastics. So business as usual is that top line all the way up. In 2040, it's up near 450 million tons. We can reduce if we practice good reduction practices. 30% of that stream can go away. Substitution, paper straws for plastic straws, compostable plates and utensils at restaurants, coated papers that can hold up to food better than regular paper plates, and just paper in general, as packaging material. Substituting can get another 17% out. And then recycling, we can get better at recycling. We can actually reduce our plastic waste stream by 20% more, they estimate, by using some better techniques in the recycling facilities, including there's some chemical options which can convert plastic to a better resin material for new plastics or plastic to fuel. Of course, these are low down, and that's why it's they've got a kind of near the bottom here, disposal. Another 23% landfilling and incineration, and then they estimate 10% could be reduced just by mismanagement. So people open burning piles of plastic, letting it blow around, it gets into the oceans. You've seen all these swirling voids of trash in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So anyhow, they took a look at this and said, well, just by using some better practices, reducing substitution and recycling, we can actually bend the curve. So if you look there below the green line, if we take those efforts now, we can plateau at the level we're at and actually start reducing the amount of plastic starting in 2030. And if we keep getting better, then we're actually going to be putting less in than we are now. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of one of the key takeaways from their study. However, COVID in 2020 sort of disrupted a little bit of the early, even right out of the gate, what we could do, because as I'm sure everybody's seen, there's a lot more shipping going on right now. People are shopping from home for stuff they normally wouldn't have. As I mentioned earlier, the price of cardboard on the market is through the roof because of all the boxes, most of them with little smiles on it that get left on your porch. And due to that, we've seen an uptick across the board at the transfer station. Every single waste and recyclable line that we have is up. So people are throwing more away. We're seeing more full barrels at the curbside, barrels that are overflowing, and that turns into roadside waste because the mechanical trucks, if you've got 4 bags hanging off the top, the robot arm is not magic. It can't just magically grab those extra bags and make sure they make it into the truck. People stuffing recycling barrels with the packing peanuts and all sorts, it goes on and on. Across the scales at the transfer station, the Construction and demolition waste is way up. Metals recycling, brush and leaf is all coming in at higher rates than normal. Everybody's, maybe not anymore, but for almost a year, people were home more than they were, with a lot of extra time on their hands, maybe. So they're generating a lot more material at home, both from consumption, but also cleaning out basements and attics and that sort of thing, and backyards. The economy is in a good place and improving, and the stimulus checks, while they're great for people's livelihoods, they also impact how much waste is brought in. So it's usually considered a leading indicator. We'll get jobs reports and new housing start numbers, at the end of the quarter. You can usually tell how good those are going to be based on how busy the transfer station is. And it's almost never fail. You'll see an uptick in construction and demo, and new housing starts are up because you can see it before the actual numbers come in. So anyhow, a lot more waste is being created, unfortunately, and I'm not sure if their numbers even from a couple years ago would hold today. So we may have delayed and probably made our situation worse here of late. All right, so now kind of what types of things could be done, and kind of where do we go now, and where's the room for growth, and what are we looking at locally to try to do in DPW, and what hopefully everybody in their own homes is looking at. People that are here tonight are kind of preaching. I'm preaching to the choir, of course, because you're interested, so you've already got the first couple steps out of the way. But biggest thing we can do is reduce. That is the most important and sometimes the most overlooked piece of that reduce, reuse, recycle triangle. If it doesn't get consumed in the society, then it doesn't have to get made, and that kind of breaks the chain right there. So take a good look at the cost of a plastic spoon. Is it worth all the time, effort, labor, material to get all the oil out of the ground, refined, processed, shipped to a plastics manufacturer, or to turn into a plastic spoon that then gets packaged, shipped, and sent to you, versus a little soap and water and dry it on a drying rack. Good example, but kind of, it's that kind of stuff that on a micro scale adds up. Of course, reusing if you can, ceramic mugs, etc. Maybe you don't need to be quite so militant. My mother's pretty well known as a plastic bag reuser. She'll use bread bags 4 or 5 times, and maybe a plastic sandwich bag 2 or 3 times. So you never know if your sandwich at her house is going to taste like a bit of lobster bisque, or if it's going to be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But maybe don't go to that extreme with it. If you can, though, avoid those single-use plastics and packaging. There are some companies that are starting to, probably as a marketing shtick, but maybe because they really mean it, advertising the fact that it's less packaging, or paper instead of styrofoam peanuts, paper shreds, maybe to surround the package for safe shipping. There are places that you can go and get the raw olive oil from the vats instead of mini jars of it, soups, beans, that kind of stuff. So best you can. More MRF facilities, those materials recovery or recycling facilities, and better tech for those that are existing or new ones that are being brought online. Casella is looking at adding a MRF facility in southern New Hampshire. I don't know where that stands. It was close a couple years ago, I think, to being added in Bow, potentially, but it kind of fell off the radar due to permitting problems. So I think they're still on the lookout, but we definitely need more places to process this material, because any of these single stream communities still need a place to send our recyclables. So we need some options that don't involve shipping it hundreds and hundreds of miles. The MRF tech, some of the things that we talked about earlier, such as the optical sensors for the plastic separation, could help cut that down too. But really, it's more facilities are needed, not better tech. They've got pretty good tech now. Dual stream curbside recycling is something that some communities have done. We could look into. That would be, where you would have a paper recycling, paper/cardboard bin, and then you'd have a rest of recycling bin, which would be the cans and the glass and plastics. So that's something that you can do. It improves the quality and less contamination, but it does require special equipment. So the trucks would either have to be changed out, or we'd need different or more trucks to be able to pick up, okay, this is the paper recycling truck, and that is the can, glass, and plastic recycling truck. It's more barrels, with 7,500, I think, barrels in town, $50, $60, $75 each. It's pretty good number just to buy barrels alone. We already spend about $10,000 a year on barrels right now between trash and recycling, just on the, as they age, wheels break, lids break, they get cracked, they're out in the sun, so they degrade, the plastic degrades. So we spend $10,000 a year just on the breakage and missing barrels. But to replace the entire town's worth, it's between $250,000 for a run of barrels. Waste to energy, as I mentioned, Massachusetts has got several plants. I bet that's the next thing we'll see in New Hampshire will be a waste to energy plant. There was some proposed, one proposed for Goffstown. I guess it's probably going on 20 years now. But due to some major concerns about the amount of trucking that would be coming through, and those trucks from out of town, trucks from out of state, air quality, the scrubber technology wasn't then what it is now, and probably isn't now what it will be in 10 years, but there's always going to be concerns about that. So I think it's going to face an uphill battle. Any place where there's a significant amount of people and a significant amount of other commercial traffic, i.e. the best place to site one because it's close to where all the trash is being generated, makes the least sense because property values are the highest and there's more people that complain. So usually the way things go, they follow the lower population areas, of course. But I wouldn't be surprised to see another waste to energy plant open up soon in New Hampshire or maybe North Mass to start to bring some of that load. There's some interesting things going on as landfills become older, and there's more studies being done on the leachate and actually excavating some of these older landfills. They find that there's bacteria, these microbes that are eating plastic, and they've adapted to consume mainly plastic. So things that were considered to have a very long half-life in a landfill now are being found to be degrading a little faster if there's a presence of this certain microbe or family of microbes. So there's some efforts to cultivate these and to see if it's something that could be scaled up to, maybe be an additional step after a MRF facility. There'd be a microbe lunch table where you'd send the plastic piece and they could generate, reduce the amount of plastic waste, and at the same time, they just like a biodigester works in a wastewater treatment plant. They generate heat, which can be used to either make heat for buildings or generate electricity. So there's some kind of interesting stuff there that could be going on. This is pretty new. In the last couple of years, they've discovered these bacteria. So that might be something to look out for. Of course, any waste diversion is good activity, which we are in the middle of a small pilot program for composting. We bought some composting turners and we've distributed them out to some first come, first serve. We've got one held aside for the library for their raffle. I don't think they've held it yet, but we're going to check in with these people and kind of see how their habits may have changed, what might be likely in the future to convince them to take on composting more front and center in their lives, and just kind of glean some data about what we can do in Goffstown. One of the biggest things for us that's sort of a stumbling block for wide-ranging composting program is that we offer curbside trash and recycling pickup. So it's really hard for folks that don't have gardens or don't have a lot of real estate, maybe in the village or in Bernardville, to bring this compost. You're now asking them to bring that material to the transfer station because otherwise they get curbside pickup. So it's a nice luxury to not have to go anywhere with the trash and recycling. But if we're trying to carve out 40% of our trash load, it's got to go somewhere. So do you offer curbside composting? Some communities have thought about it. Some do it as a charge, but as soon as you start charging for it, it's less desirable, of course. There are some companies that will offer to pick it up. They have a network of farms that use it, and then they'll bring back finished compost for the people that contribute to the program for their own gardens. But again, if you don't need it, or if you don't have a place for a garden or a lawn, it's not going to be much use to you. So some of that would be network building, I think, if we're going to really scale up composting. But we kind of want to know what the thoughts are of these people, and maybe some good stories to tell once they're done about how their habits changed, and kind of use that as education for the rest of the community. So be on the lookout for that. And as I mentioned, as the state changes, hopefully rules about what can be composted and meat and dairy can be added. There's been no sign that either meat or dairy contribute to any health issues with the compost. That was a concern, I guess, when they exempted those materials from the composting solid waste rules years ago. But Vermont and Massachusetts, they allow it. They haven't seen any issues health-wise. And it actually does create a good source of browns for the compost. So hopefully those things can change, and that will allow us to sort of, roll in some of the local restaurants and stuff too. And it takes a little bit more legwork, but certainly if we can get 10, 20, 30% out of our solid waste stream and out of the landfill, that's a good thing. So there's some communities, Hollis and Lebanon, have a few waivers from the state for some of their material. And they've got a few programs going themselves that are pretty exciting, but neither of those communities offers curbside trash and recycling. So it's hard to compare us to them. Hate to have to think about taking a step back with curbside in order to take a step forward for composting. So I guess we'll kind of see what the future holds with that. And then finally, kind of just a thought in general, as everybody probably knows, but we've been for years, there's been external costs due to the recycling or lack of recycling that were being paid, but just not by us, not by the users, not by the people in the United States. It was either the cost to the environment or cost to the quality of life of people in China primarily, that they were putting the low cost of recycling on their backs. So now we're seeing some of the pain of that, and costs are being more equally distributed, but still not there. So the question is always, who's going to pay this? As a community, we're going to do it. As individual users, how does that get distributed so everybody knows the full cost of a single plastic wrapping on a package from Amazon. Couple ideas for further reading, listening, viewing. That systemic a report that I mentioned earlier, if you Google that, Breaking the Plastic Wave, it's called. That's pretty interesting. NPR, I like that story they had about the big oil and big plastic, kind of knowing back in the 70s that plastic recycling was not really financially feasible. And still pumping it up anyway. It's kind of interesting. Trashed is a 2012. There's two films called Trashed, but the 2012 documentary is the version that I talk about here. That is pretty eye-opening. We have our solid waste employees watch it as part of their annual training when they start. Anyway, that kind of goes into the situation around the country for landfilling. It's got some interesting information about places in Michigan that are landfill sites that accept trash every day from Canada because it's so much cheaper for Canadians to throw their trash away in Michigan. That it's just a steady stream of trucks almost 24 hours a day from Canada across the I think it's the Mackinac Bridge into Michigan. So kind of eye-opening there. Waste 360 has a podcast called Nothing Wasted. I think they've got 150 something episodes, maybe more. Different topics every week. Sometimes it's industry info. Sometimes it's new technology or new news and kind of on a good spin, sort of a neat thing if you're a podcast person. And then if you want the industry side of things, Waste Management or MSW Magazine last year had a Year of Innovation article that had some of the up and coming MRF facility stuff that was being ironed out, new tech.
Thank you. And the library has purchased lots of resources to support this initiative. So check out our catalog too, for books and movies. So we do have some stuff also to help educate our community. So let's open it up for questions.
The question was, is mandatory recycling being enforced? And if so, what are the repercussions and kind of how we're handling it? Yes, so Goffstown solid waste ordinance does require, so while the state of New Hampshire doesn't require it, the town of Goffstown requires that people recycle recyclable materials. So that means either the blue bin or bring it to the transfer station and it goes into the recycling building. So we do enforce it when it's brought to our attention. So if somebody's bringing material to the recycling building and that's clearly not, or vice versa, if we see them at the hopper and they're throwing, bags of cans into the trash hopper, if the attendant's there or see it, we've only got the 3 full timers that are on site usually every day, and then the others are in the trucks. So they can't be everywhere at once. But if they see something, certainly we're trying to correct it on site. If the curbside program, as you might imagine, is a tougher nut to crack. Yeah. So what happens there, what usually will happen when we have the truck offload, either the trash or the recycling truck, if we see contamination, and maybe I'll just talk about them both because it's almost the same process. If we see a lot of recyclable materials in the trash stream, we will try to narrow down from the driver. We'll know for that load, he'll kind of look at it as he's dumping. We'll know where he's been, what neighborhoods he's been in that day, that time of day. So they'll make, depending on the routes that day and the loads and the holiday schedule, sometimes there's more or less trash, and they might make 5 trips a day back to the transfer station. They might make 2 on a lighter day. So they will know roughly where they've been. So ideally they're reporting that up to their supervisor, and we can look at barrel audits for that neighborhood or that section of neighborhoods. So we'll do barrel audits. Usually once a year. We try to, that's a good intern task, as you might imagine. Yeah. So little do they know, we tell them when they get hired, but little do they know they may do more than one. We'll have them do a few, and sometimes even without any reports of contamination or lack of recycling, we'll have a barrel audits on a neighborhood just to kind of gauge, if things are getting a little bit loose. If we see problems, we have stickers that go on the barrels. The drivers have stickers too. There are video cameras on the trucks, so as the automated arm comes up, they can see what's coming, usually pretty much what's coming out of the can and into the top hopper of the truck. So occasionally they can catch it before it even makes it into the truck, and it's now mixed up with everybody's stuff. In that case, they'll hop out and they'll put a sticker on a barrel that says, "Hey, give us a ring," and we'll talk to you about what was the problem, or they'll handwrite right on the note, that what the issue was. We try to bring the honey more than the vinegar, but every now and then, we do have to crack down. I will say it has to be pretty bad before somebody loses their barrel privileges, but it has happened. We cans of chemicals, that can be a almost a one strike and you're out situation if it's really bad stuff. If it's something that they've told us on the phone, sometimes I need more barrels at my house, and we tell them the ordinance only allows the one per single family residence of each type. Here's the process. If you'd like to request additional barrels, you can go to the select board and ask. We know the answer is probably going to be no, unless there's really extenuating circumstances. But if they've told us all this information and then the next week, miraculously, the recycling barrel is full of trash, and we'd had that conversation a week ago, so there are a few cases like that, we still try to work with people, but it's the malicious intent, I guess, piece that usually will trigger loss of a barrel. But there aren't many. Usually it's a sticker or a visit or a phone call, and things get quite a bit better. And we'll follow up with a barrel audit in the same neighborhood and check and see if things improve or not. So we try to stay after it, but as you can imagine, almost 2,000 barrels in some days of the week. That's a tall order to keep tracking it all. Sometimes the proof is in the pudding. When we get the reports back when the Casella reclaim facility tells us our contamination rate is super low. You know, that we know that's good news. That means all along the way, hopefully we've been doing good things. I did leave out one extra step on the recycling floor, more so than the trash hopper, but on the recycling floor, our Bobcat operator is able, as he's pushing material in when the trucks drop it, or people come to the door and throw material right on the floor. It looks like kind of a mess, but it provides us that extra opportunity to get that human look, and he can actually see if there's some contamination in the recycling, especially. That's the one that dings us the most. Then he can pull it out and get that into the waste stream. So the inability of some to recycle is the harder one, because it goes into a black plastic bag, and it's really hard to catch, unfortunately. So the question was, in the early 90s, there may have been a MRF materials recovery facility in Hooksett, New Hampshire. And the question was whether it was still there or operating. I believe they had closed, but that was another potential site to reopen another MRF. And maybe that was Hooksett that I was thinking of, not Bow. As of right now, there is not one there that I'm aware of. And I don't believe there's any being cited or in the process of being permitted that are, that far along. So, I think the market's going to work to our advantage soon, because it's going to be cheaper to build one of those than it's going to be to landfill pretty darn quick. So I think, for bad reasons, it's going to probably become a reality sooner rather than later. We'll get more of these.
So I don't necessarily have a question, but just a comment. I reuse my shopping bags every time I go to the grocery store. I have a refillable water bottle. And I go to the grocery store, and it's almost impossible to have a true reduction in what you purchase, because there's plastic everywhere in the grocery store.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me personally, to feel positive that this situation will improve for our country, because it's just everywhere.
It's I saw an article the other day, a pair of articles. One that said that the Paris Accords will force some better habits, especially when it comes to plastic, because the emissions from the plastic process and the use of fossil fuels to generate, of course, are so big that to meet the goals of the Paris Accords, it will have to happen. And then I saw another article that said that not just that, maybe we need a Paris Accords for recycling, and really bring some other forces to bear, because I think you're right. Well, you saw those curves I showed a few slides before the end there, where it's almost like, how is this even? It's going to double in 20 years, and we're talking about shaving 10 or 12 or 15% off by actions we're taking at home. It's just not going to amount to it. You can buy something for 10 cents on Amazon, shows up with half a pound of plastic, and then in a box 3 times the size, and it's packed inside another box. It's like, this is just not going to work.
Yeah, that was probably the best slide that you had. I was just really intrigued by that whole thing.
Yeah, I have a comment too. There's a site on the a Facebook group that we have access to in Goffstown called Buy Nothing. Has anybody else seen it or participated in it? It's really awesome. It's people post what they have to give away, or what they want, or in some cases they will charge a small fee, I think, for things. But I've seen people use that process and get or give things that maybe would have gone into the transfer station, into the trash. Right. So if we somehow could publicize that more, maybe more people would take advantage of it.
I'd love to. If you send me or send Diane, and she could send me, if we get the link to that Facebook group, Buy Nothing, I think you said it was, I can, try to share it on our page too. More people know about it, the better. We get asked, and that kind of brings up a good point. I didn't really get into it, because it's kind of a tough conversation too, is the Still Good Shed, or the swap shops, or treasure trailer, that kind of stuff. a lot of communities recently, including my own here in Amherst, stopped with those due to COVID concerns. But other communities in Merrimack, when I worked there, we had one that turned into a business enterprise because it was taking so much time and effort for the staff to run and manage. Otherwise, it just turns into another place for people to bring trash and hazardous waste and stuff like that. You know, put it in the treasure trailer. Somebody will want this paint for sure. So you need staff time or volunteers to do it. And some communities have hired people to run it, and that person will get a revenue. They'll start selling items, and it's no longer free, and it kind of spirals away from what the original intent was. I think in everybody's, ideally, it'd be great if we could have a place for that to happen, and I think that might be certainly a better solution than to try to have, town staff, keep tabs and track all that and build a building to house it all. Why not? If one user has it and another user needs it, that's a perfect thing. So I'd love to help pump that up for sure.
Okay, I guess that's it. And we've just scratched the surface of this topic, and I'm sure, Adam, you live it every day in your job, and I really appreciate you being here to help us understand this. Thank you so much, Adam. And just as a reminder, this is Diane Hathaway. I'm from the Goffstown Public Library. Please check out our website for the rest of our events related to this initiative called Community Conversations, the Environment. So thanks for attending. Thank you, Adam, and we will see you.